Hello everyone and welcome to our webinar this evening for World Childless Week. I'm Kate from Fertility Network UK, and joining us this evening we have two really fabulous guests. We've got Lesley Pyne, who's the author of Finding Joy Beyond Childlessness, and Debbie Howe, who's a specialist fertility counsellor. This evening we're going to be talking about moving on from treatment and about living without children. And we've had some questions from you already, which we're going to be putting to Debbie and Lesley first. If you've got any questions as we go, you can put them in the Q&A or in the chat box and we'll answer them as we get to them. This webinar is being recorded and it'll be available on our YouTube channel within the next week or so, and we'll post the link to the webinar on the webinar page on our website. Lesley, I wanted to start with you. I wonder if you could tell us a bit about your story and how you made the decision to stop having treatment and to face a future without children, and how you actually made that decision as well.
Yeah, sorry, I just got booted off and back on again. So
I'm glad you're back here with us
now. I'm the blogger and author of Finding Joy Beyond Childlessness. I met Kate some years ago when I was a trustee for Fertility Network UK, and I'm also ambassador for World Childless Week. So yeah, we started trying when I was 35, which I probably realise now was probably a bit too late. After a year, we were referred for IVF, and 6 unsuccessful rounds later, we made the decision to stop when I got to 40. We looked at the stats, and the chances of success dropped off a cliff at 40, and the chances of getting a disabled child increased. And to be fair, 39 and a half, 40, would it really have mattered? But the last round we had was our free NHS round on my 40th birthday, and we were done, to be fair, as well. We couldn't have, I don't think either of us could have taken any more emotionally or physically. I mean, my husband was quite, all that, everything that you're pumping through your body, it's not good, is it really? So I think I was pretty numb at the time, because I'm from Yorkshire and that's what we do. We don't just keep calm and carry on. But we joined, we hibernated for a year, and we joined More to Life, and then found we've got a group of friends who are still our friends now. We've been through everything together, and that's been really special. As I say, I'm from Yorkshire. We just like that, pull yourself together, get on with it. I didn't know I was grieving, and if I had, I didn't know how to. And then a few years later, my mum died, and I remember walking down the road and taking the grief out of my head and putting it in a box, and there it stayed. And six, maybe 7 years ago, my dad died, and that box was getting full and overflowing. Eventually, after a bit of pushing from some friends, I started therapy, which was the best decision I've made, I think. And that's been the catalyst to everything else. She gave me the space to grieve and taught me tools, encouraged me to yoga, which I absolutely love, and creativity, both of which have been huge supports over the years. And at the time, I also had a website supporting childless women, and I'd been collecting stories of women who, if you like, made it through. And I decided, I wondered if there was any similarity between what they were doing, and that there became the book, as I realised that there were various things that they did. And as I worked, I guess my other bit of therapy was working through everything that was in the book. So things like connecting to your body, self-acceptance, and I came out the other side a different person. And I think Kate said to me that I look 10 years younger, so I'll take that any day. Now I love my life. I think there's many opportunities to live a life that fits me and my husband. And I, in the last few years, certainly I've done things that I wouldn't have done if we'd had children. So I had 2 things that I'd learned, actually. There is a grief process to go through, and don't underestimate it. But it also can be an opportunity to find yourself, if you like, and you absolutely can find joy. Absolutely, no question.
That's a really positive message, Lesley. Thank you. I think one of the difficult things for lots of people is knowing when that moment is there. And you seem to have had quite a clear-cut kind of
Mm.
thing in your mind about 40. We had a question from someone, which actually I'm going to put to Debbie, because I know, Debbie, a lot of people do find it really difficult around that time of giving up. This person says that they're due to start another cycle soon, and that they've said if this one doesn't work, it will be the final one, but that she's been delaying the treatment because she's actually frightened of having to face up to it not working and moving on. So she knows she's getting older every month, and she feels she's actually making it worse and less likely to be successful, but at the same time she feels very stuck. And she wondered what advice you would give her. I think it's quite common for people to feel like that, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And just before I do answer that question, sorry, just wanted to come back to Lesley's story, actually. Thank you, Lesley. I've read your book. It is the first time I've heard you speak in that way, though. But just kind of the parallels, really, between the question that the lady's asking in the here and now and kind of, I guess, your scenario as well, Lesley. And I think very much so, to reiterate what Lesley's saying, it's creating that space, isn't it? To be able to look at one's fears and to look about what's the scariness there, what's the anxiety. And that's absolutely why counselling is part of fertility treatment, so that we can sit down together with a trained professional in a confidential space to be able to reflect upon, to be able to bring out what some of those fears are, to have a look at them in the safety of the counselling space, virtually, on the telephone, face to face, so that you can then process what some of the fears are. Because sometimes what can happen is the block becomes the sense of not wanting to make the treatment and the decision for treatment, because the ultimate fear is this is our last treatment cycle. And potentially that can intensify the anxiety. And I think, again, just coming back to what Lesley was saying, there needs to be we need to make the space. You know, that's a lot of treatment that you're talking about, that you've been through, and potentially it can be consecutively and intensely. And sometimes it's kind of, before we make a decision to act, we kind of have to make a decision to be. Make some space for that. So I would really encourage you, if you haven't already, access the fertility counsellor. There is best practice that one is attached to clinics, to have that space, and then to be able to really reflect upon, you know, what you can do in the here and now. The anxiety is in the future, isn't it, as kind of we've spoken about, but trying to make peace with whatever decision you make in the here and now, so that you can make the choices going forward.
Oh, you've gone mute, Kate.
Oh, sorry. Do clinics maybe always offer counselling to people who've sort of finishing treatment? Because I know sometimes that's one of the things that people say to us, is that they feel when treatment hasn't been successful, that almost the clinic doesn't really want to see them anymore. And I wonder, does that happen, or should they still be able to access the clinic counsellor?
Okay. Yeah. I think if we were to hold up, I don't know, what's the word, a mission statement for all counselling provision, it would absolutely have that in there, so that, you know, counselling is accessible at every stage of the fertility journey, regardless about how long that is. Because, you know, Lesley's mentioned 6 years. This lady's talked about her attempt. So the answer is, in an ideal world, absolutely, but every clinic is managed in a different way. I feel very blessed that the clinic I have has got that policy, but obviously it's not the same for every clinic. And it is worth asking, I think, when you are part of the you know, the fertility journey and having the accessing the services, to find out what's on offer in your clinic, and is there an aftercare. You know, can you access the counselling service at any point? The endings of treatment are as important as anything else. So for me, it's all absolutely essential that there is emotional, psychological support for people going through this journey.
Thanks. Lesley, did you actually have counselling when you were at the point of stopping, or did you do anything at all?
No, I think it was a long time ago now, and I don't think they offered it, actually. And I'm not sure I would have been particularly open to it, just because of my upbringing and where we were at the time. I would like to add to that question. I think there's one thing I think that stops a lot of people from stopping is they don't believe that they can be happy if they don't have children. And that's a lot of societal pressure that everyone puts on us. But so I would throw that back actually at whoever asked the question and said, well, what would it take you to believe that you can be happy without children? Maybe start to think about what your life could look like. And people said, well, we've been happy as a couple already, so we can continue being happy as a couple. Maybe there's things that we can do that we wouldn't have done before, and also find role models. I mean, there's a lot more out there. I've got some in my book, but there's so many more bloggers, and there's lots of people who've shared their stories on World Childless Week. And I mean, to some extent, people like myself, we're happy to, as a friend of mine said, you're doing your childless thing, and we're happy to talk about it. But there's lots of, if you like, normal people who are just living their life, and it's a different life to the one that they thought they had, but they still found their happiness. So I would really, find out some role models, go and stalk a few blogs and see what people are up to, and just, sort of put your feet in the water to just sort of see what that life might be like. Hopefully you'll be successful. But yeah.
Thanks, Lesley. There's another question which is actually quite pertinent to what you were just saying, which is someone who's saying one anxiety they have about being childless is the second wave of pregnancy announcements that will come in the future from friends' children. And how do you manage we're going to be grandparents announcements? I'm not sure, Lesley, you're quite at that stage yet, but
I don't know about that. Well, I mean, to me, I guess it's because I've done the work and I'm happy with my life. My life is full and complete. They don't bother me at all, actually. And I know I've had this debate with some of my other childless friends, and one of my friends went to a knitting group, and all they talked about were their grandchildren. And she didn't go back in the end, just because, not because it bothered her, but just because it was irritating, quite frankly. And I think sometimes we can feel sorry for people who's live their life vicariously through their children and their grandchildren, and they've got nothing else in life. I mean, my life is full, and so I'm very, very happy with it. I guess, I don't know, maybe Debbie's got something to add to that.
I was going to say, Debbie, I mean, what do you think as a counsellor? Do you sometimes get people coming back to you much later in life?
Just going back to that, so there is a kind of an extension in terms of where I work in the clinic, that we can see people for up to 2 years after treatment. So potentially, when that happens in terms of grandparents, that might not be accessible to me personally. But I guess what I was also thinking, as Lesley was speaking, is often it's kind of that, again, that worry about how it will be for me hearing about grandparents is again another stage of our own transition, because I think what I'm hearing you saying, Lesley, is you've transitioned through the treatments in a personal way, and that question feels quite difficult to answer, because if there may be lesser of an intensity about feeling the pain, that might not mean that it might not hurt or still sort of have a wound there, but it might be, again, depending upon how it is, heard or felt differently for you. But again, it feels like it's one of those future-proofing things that we try and do in order to protect ourselves going forward from hurts and pains.
Thanks, Debbie. We've got a question here from someone which I think we should probably answer now rather than later, which is with when trying to conceive isn't being successful, at which point do you decide to stop? Which I think, Lesley, you've answered a bit. But the other thing they've asked is why not pursue other avenues? And I wondered if you could talk us a bit through your sort of thought processes around that.
Well, I think for both myself and my husband, the only thing we wanted was our own child. Yes, donor eggs would have been the next option, because I was getting, but we decided to pursue a happy life together for the two of us. And I mean, I think it's one of the days on World Childless Week is about adoption, and we didn't, it's not something we wanted to do. We do make a difference to children overseas in a different way, For me, I think adoption is different. You still have to go through that grief of not having your own child before you go into that, and it can be very hard. But I think it's just for us. I don't mean it sounds our decisions were fairly clear cut, I guess, in a way, that it wasn't anything that our child or not, none at all.
Thanks, Lesley. I wonder, Debbie, I mean, do you see a lot of people like Lesley who are very clear about their decisions, or do you find that a lot of people are still quite unsure about other avenues? And is that something that you think they need to take some time to think through?
Yeah, I do feel that many of the people I speak with in the counselling sessions aren't clear. As they said, there is a lot of loss and grief, and some people are very clear that, you know, what might have felt very clear of wanting their own child in that biological sense, after a couple of rounds of treatment where it isn't successful, the desire for a child can still be there and be intensified. And so what was thought to be not an option or even considered before is now something that they need to consider. So hence, you know, why that kind of implications counselling is discussed in very, you know, sort of detail in terms of that. And it's also about that consideration that it may be somebody else's eggs, it may be somebody else's sperm from either an unknown or a known donor that needs to be sort of considered, because the desire for the child is so great that that's an avenue that can be explored. But again, within counselling, it has to be done in that safe, confidential space. And because we've all got our own fingerprint, that's why fertility is so, I don't know, lots of shades of grey, because of our uniqueness within our journeys and how we experience it. And that's why, thank you, Lesley, for continuing to kind of reference different support networks and different points of which people can find support outside of all of that. It's so important.
I think it is, isn't it? And when we came out of it, more to life has always been really important. And for us, I'm using the word us because it was so helpful as a couple, and you know, and that was all there was. But so grateful that it was available. But as you say, there's lots of blogs and lots of support networks more for women than for men. But there's a lot more out there now.
Thanks, Lesley. I'm sure you've seen a real change over the years since you've been in this world, and you've been a key part of that, I have to say.
Making me feel old there, Kate. Thank you very much.
We have another question, actually, which is particularly addressed at you, Lesley, because it's someone who said, having had 4 failed rounds of IVF and miscarriages, we finally gave up trying to conceive and had come to terms with being a childless couple. I've read your book and it's really helped me. Thank you for that. My question for you is, my friends are getting pregnant and giving birth, and I'm still finding this a real trigger. Is there anything I can do to accept this more or find it less of a trigger?
I think, again, keep doing the work, I would say. And the other thing to consider is whether you should perhaps take a break from the friendship. I think that, you know, that didn't happen for me, but I know friends who've done that they, the friends who really understood, were sensitive to their what they were going through, but some people weren't, so they had to take a break from the friendship. I mean, give yourself permission not to go to baby showers, christenings, whatever people have. You know, the answer doesn't have to be yes to, you don't have to accept every invite. Put yourself first, I would say. And I think, I don't know, I think probably maybe Debbie's got more to say on that. I don't know. But look after yourself, I think that's the key.
Absolutely, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. That sort of kindness to self and permission to, as you said, not go to certain events, but sometimes that can then sort of limit our interactions with other people. And sometimes what I do hear from ladies particularly is having that duality of emotions. On one hand, actually really kind of being pleased at times for that announcement, whilst holding on to that pain and devastation that isn't their news to you know, to be able to offer. So we can kind of live with a duality of emotions, which they can then feel confusing too. I do think it is about being kind to yourself, actually. And
thanks, Debbie. That's
yeah,
That's a really important point. And we've got a question which actually I am going to address to you, particularly Debbie, which is someone who's saying egg donation's actively encouraged by clinics, which makes you feel like you should pursue that option. Is that something that you recognise sometimes, that you hear from people?
Actively, again, I guess, thank you for the person that's put that into the box. I guess it's that perception and that experience of the clinic, and I would hope, it sounds like it's feeling like it's being forced upon somebody as an option. Again, hence why counselling is very important, to be able to absolutely decide if that's something you want to do. And I think what happens with fertility treatment, because there are so many, you know, avenues potentially of egg donation, and things can feel a little bit like they can carry on. There isn't a clear ending all the time, unless one does make that ending. I would hope it isn't forced upon people, but I'm certain that there is an option to take up if that's what they feel, the person feels that they want to do.
It's interesting that I was just, I think there was a point we didn't have, as I said, there was counselling wasn't available, and I think there was a point when one of the consultant said we should stop, but I didn't hear that. Roger heard it, I didn't hear it, so that's why. And I have no recollection of it, you know, ever being said. I was just set on continuing, which is another reason for the importance of having counselling, talking to somebody independent through the process.
Thank you. Thanks, Lesley. There's a really nice comment here from someone who says this group and session is amazing. So grateful that you have all made it a topic of discussion. This person didn't have treatment but was approved, and then their husband decided they didn't want to carry on and have children. And they have agreed to this, but keeps going back and feeling the pain of lacking. Like the previous questions, hearing announcements of others is difficult, and also social pressures. How do you deal with society? How do you manage all the questions from family, friends and society? It's a very good question, actually. Lesley, would you like to answer that first, and then maybe we'll move over to
yeah, I think for me there was, I went through a process of hiding to start with, and the only people who knew we were going through treatment were our two sets of parents and one set of friends. And for a few years after that, there was the same. People thought we didn't want children, which kind of worked quite well as a defense mechanism, because, and you know, people, I sort of probably gave off those negative vibes, particularly at work. People didn't come and show me scans and things, and I've forgotten what your question was, Kate. Sorry.
about how do you manage the questions around family, because I think people are quite, I mean, people don't hold back from asking, oh, do you have children? And then if you don't, do people actually ask you why you don't as well, do you find?
I'm happy to talk about it, actually, and I think maybe come up with an answer that as we were just saying, is protect yourself, be kind to yourself. So I'm happy to get into the discussion with people. So I'm very happy to tell anybody that that we're childless. But I would just work out an answer. If you're not happy to do that, then work out an answer that sort of protects yourself. Maybe maybe tell a little fib that says we didn't want children, or da da da, or something like that, or it didn't work out, and just this, because the way you say it will determine what answer people give, wouldn't it? You know, so you can kind of, people can tell if you don't want to talk about it. Yeah.
That's a good point, actually. A lot of it is the way you say it as much as what you say, isn't it? And sometimes it's just about closing down that conversation, possibly. I mean, Debbie, do you find that something that people often want to talk to you about?
Yeah. And again, you know, thank you, Lesley. It's kind of that whole sense of that armor, isn't it, about that defense mechanism, what it looks like. And it can be, I've spoken with people that absolutely say the absolute opposite to how they're feeling inside, because they don't want that further question. Oh, I'm too busy with my career, or it's not the right time for us. And so there can be absolute, sort of that answer that is so far away from how they're feeling inside, which is the space created in therapy to be able to talk again. You know, I talked about those conflicting emotions. It's that wonderful space to be able to talk to somebody about, I'm saying this, but that doesn't match with what I'm feeling inside. Actually, inside I'm crying, but I'm saying, oh, it's not the right time for me. I'm trying to laugh it off. Absolutely. And there is something, isn't there, sometimes about having to kind of maybe have a response, as you said, that you feel comfortable with. It's not the truth, but that would prevent any further questioning, because sometimes it's how I hear things is that probing can feel painful and a bit like a violation. And I'm so delighted that there's so much more awareness now about things not to say, you know, to people. I think that general conversation list about those sort of types of questions, there's more awareness raising with the likes of Fertility Network UK and the various organisations. So yeah.
Thanks, Debbie.
I never ask people myself now, because I know that that's, you know.
Yeah, that's interesting, Lesley, actually, isn't it? There's another question here, which I think, Debbie, maybe you would be best suited to answer first, which is someone's asking what support there is for women when grief may reoccur or intensify years after stopping treatment. I mean, would you still recommend that someone in that situation went to see a fertility counsellor?
Absolutely. As I said, I guess the training and the information that we hear and what we know in terms of the work we do with fertility patients, we know that grief isn't something that kind of begins and ends, and it's so interwoven, as you've said, Lesley, already, into many aspects of our lives with fertility, that it isn't just one grief, is it? And I think if it's still being felt, still being experienced, or you're still putting it in that box somewhere, then yes, if you feel it's appropriate for you, because again, we can't make people come to counselling in that way, but if there's something that's still unfinished for you, something you'd like something to say to somebody, absolutely. There are BICA accredited counsellors on the website. You could also look on the BACP. Obviously, it's about the relationship with the counsellor as well that's important. But if there's something there that keeps raising for you, then absolutely, you know.
I mean, grief is that emotion that we least want to feel, isn't it? And we're all going to go through it at some point. And so
about that, particularly about grief, because we've talked a lot about grief, and I think the idea for any of us, as you just said, of experiencing grief is always something we really want to avoid. But I think for people listening now, I mean, does it go away? Can it go away? I suppose that's the question.
I think I remember when my mum died, the vicar said that he felt grief was like you start a walk and you put on a heavy backpack, rucksack, whatever you like to call it, and when you first start walking, it feels really heavy. The longer you walk, the lighter it feels. At times you don't notice it, and other times it feels really heavy. And I think for me, that's my experience. You know, I mean, I've lost both my parents, so there's a whole lot of that. But at times I forget, not forget. I suppose the scar grows over the wound, to mix various metaphors, and it's not as strong. You know, what used to knock me over doesn't anymore. I mean, I'm still missing my parents. I don't necessarily miss not having children.
That's a really interesting response, actually, because someone's just asked, does it get easier to deal with? And I think the answer to that is probably yes.
Just behind this wall, the people, we've got a terraced house, they've just got a baby, and this is my yoga room, and it's like, it's a bit irritating, really, the crying baby next door. And next door, they've got two little ones, and it's like, and obviously they've been teaching the homeschooling, and I've just thought, thank goodness I don't have to do that, actually.
That's really a positive way of looking at it. And I think that actually, Debbie, do you find that as you see people going through this process, they do start to feel more like Lesley?
I think Lesley's talking from kind of some years on, and I think that what Lesley does is give people that hope and reassurance that there can be, you know, a lifestyle after childlessness. I think for me personally, I still see people in the very early stages of that, and grief can be demonstrated in lots of different ways. I guess what I've got in my head is that image of the, you know, the kind of the the grief being like that and feeling very central, and what happens, thank you Lesley, is you kind of build a life around that. But whilst the grief is raw, we know the grief's raw, and what can happen is, because fertility encompasses many invisible losses that aren't obvious to the naked eye, that may not be talked about, they get kept within our body, and they don't get a voice, and they're the kind of grief. So sort of referring back to the lady's question, I'm presuming it's a lady, I don't know, the question before about should the grief be discussed several years later, because there's so many different hidden kinds of grief, it's not all the same.
Thank you. We've got a question here from someone who's talking about the fact that their siblings didn't have children either, and they're asking, how do you move forward knowing that the bloodline has ended, saying that they struggle, knowing they don't have their DNA carried through and no family around, and struggling with the grief of losing parents, and not having their own biological family. I wondered, Lesley, because you've talked about losing your parents, if
I'm an only child as well, actually. So I am the end of the line. Interesting, yeah. I to be honest, at points I think I've buried my head in the sand a little bit about this, but we had I was part of a discussion which went out today on World Childless Week, actually, with there were half a dozen of us talking about it, all different, the legacy issue, which is kind of what this is, and we had a lovely discussion, and we came up with the fact that what's more important is to live today and to make a difference today. Let's face it, who remembers their grandparents or their great-grandparents? I mean, very few people get remembered further down the line. So it's making a difference now, or make today count, I think was the sort of mantra that we came up with. I'm not sure if that helps, because I'm not sure I've quite got to the bottom of all of that myself. Well,
I think it's a really difficult question, isn't it? I mean, Debbie, is it something that you sometimes find people are particularly worried about? Is that idea of kind of not leaving their mark in the future?
And again, I think that mark in the future can look, in many different ways. Sometimes it can be absolutely dependent upon where, the sense of what the hope and what the dream was. So, and again, that's that place. I don't feel I can comment specifically around that, but absolutely, it's about whatever that market is that we're hoping to leave in terms of, as Lesley talked about, the legacy, and being able to come to some kind of peace that imagined dream isn't going to be realised.
Thanks. And I mean, I have to say, Lesley, if we're talking about leaving legacies, just leaving your book is certainly a legacy for other people, and all that you do to support people is a fantastic legacy. And someone's asked a question relating back to what you were just saying, Lesley, about saying that they live near a school and hear the children all day and finds themselves comforting themselves with the idea of not having to deal with screaming children, and asks, is it a defence mechanism? And if it is, can it be more damaging than helpful?
Well, I don't know, maybe I don't know. My husband's sister had really struggled with parenting, and for us there was a lot of reassurance that the grass isn't always greener, because maybe it's about that, isn't it, that we think, and I was talking to somebody as well at the weekend who's got two daughters who are 20. Every third sentence was, "This is hard," and I was like, I don't have to do that. So that's maybe it is a bit of a defense mechanism, but I think it's also that we always, it's like we think parenting is going to make us happy. We think that it's the answer to everything, but if we're not happy in the first place, or then it won't give us that. And I think sometimes it's reassuring. Maybe it's reassuring to know that it doesn't.
That's a really important point, actually. I mean, Debbie, coming back to this idea of it potentially being more damaging than helpful, I mean, from a counselling point of view, is there any truth in that?
I think in terms of damaging, I guess I'm thinking also about the fact that there's this word sense of it being a defence mechanism, and if we are not acknowledging again both parts of it, that there may be some aspects of truth, you know, that there may be some points in our thinking that actually there might be a relief that we don't have to deal with children or screaming children, but there might also be that thought that comes along with it that, oh, I would have liked to have, you know. I think it's about being true to ourselves in our thoughts. If the defences are constantly, you know, batting away of the opposite, then I think, and it becomes troublesome because we don't feel that we're sort of true to ourselves, then I think that's where there can be some kind of suppression of our psychological well-being and our physical. Damaging, again, it depends on how that person's dealing with it. If it's a genuine felt sense of, I'm really glad that I don't have to deal with that, as kind of Lesley you're sort of talking about in that stage, then that's fine. If it helps for a moment of time when it's break time and those children are out there, and then maybe that person thinks, oh yeah, I'm glad I haven't got to deal with that, and then goes inside the house or whatever it is and has a different thought, then that's fine too. We need to kind of integrate ourselves, don't we, so that we feel like we're a whole person. And sometimes fertility can make us feel that we're not.
Thanks. That's it. That's an interesting answer. There's a really good thing here that someone says that related to the question about do you have children or why don't you have children. So my husband's come up with a great answer of unfortunately not. I've used it a lot. It works and get the message across without having to say anything else if you don't want to. Have you ever used that, Lesley?
I think I have. Yes, I probably have. Yeah. And again, that's something that you can say in different ways, can't you?
Yeah, exactly. We've got another question here, which was around whether you had, either of you, any hints or tips on finding intimacy again after trying to conceive for 5 years and depression from it all. I mean, is that something, Lesley, that has come up at all during World Childless Week?
Well, yesterday, I think there was lots of stuff about that. So there was several discussions and some beautiful blogs, so I'll refer people to that. And the other thing I would say, without talking about too much personal experience in that level, is for me, it's been about getting friendly with my body. And my therapist said to me, what do you think about your body? And I said, my reply was, it's the thing that carries my head around. And that's changed somewhat in the last few years. And so, I mean, and it's also that, you know, we think our body's failed us. It can't do that one thing that every other woman can, you know, woman's body can do. So it's about forgiving it and becoming friendly with it. For me, that's really helped a lot.
Debbie, do you have any other tips or advice for someone in that situation?
Again, thank you, Lesley. Absolutely. There's a lot of anguish in the counselling room about how their bodies failed them, how people have to hand their body over to the fertility process, how sexual intercourse becomes an act rather than something of pleasure. I think in terms of, you know, how invasive the treatments can be at times in terms of scans, egg collections, medicines. Sometimes, again, it could be with the male partner, that pressure to have sex at a certain time, whether that's convenient or not convenient. So I think, you know, in terms of that, it's looking at where that is, what's happening for the intimacy to not be there. Is it that intimacy can be recreated in a very gentle way? And as Lesley said, you know, to try and sort of love ourselves and our bodies for what we are rather than what we hoped they'd be. So we need to have that. And also it's about how intimacy is. What's the expectation? You know, has there been a distance in the relationships about things that haven't been spoken about? Could it be that intimacy could literally be down on the settee together and be very close and have, you know, sort of hold hands? And what does lovemaking look like now? You know, so there's lots of avenues. And obviously in terms of there is specific sexual relationships counselling as well, that, you know, that can be sort of looked at. But I think it's about what's the block there? What is it? Is it lots of things? Is it me not liking my body anymore? Is it for a woman, is it do not feel like I'm a woman anymore? So it's about exploring all of that and trying to recreate the intimacy. And often it could be, you know, that kind of you know, having that meal together, deliberately setting time apart in a very kind of, I don't know, gentle way.
Date night or something.
Yes, thank you, date night.
Listening to you both speaking, I think the one thing that's really clear from what both of you have been saying is actually quite how damaging to people's sense of self the whole experience of going through fertility problems and treatment can be. I mean, did you find, Lesley, that you felt that it had changed you as a person when you were going through it all?
Yes, I think that, and it becomes, you said lots of things become mechanical, don't they? You do that because, you know, yeah, and for both of us, I think we had several, well, 6 in a very short time, so life was focused around that. So you just become a thing, I think, don't you? Yeah.
One thing that people sometimes say when they stop is that they feel almost a sense of freedom from stopping. I just wondered, did you feel that at all when you finally stopped? Was there a kind of, now actually we can get on with the rest of our lives and stop this dominating everything?
Yeah, I think so. It's a few years back now, but yes, there was a whole, we sort of hibernated for a bit because we didn't know what to do. I mean, there was, you know, this is some years ago now, and we didn't, there was not so many resources out there. So I think once we got ourselves back after that, yes, it was like, well, okay, what we're going to do now? We can do things that we wouldn't have done otherwise. And I think, and I've got a number of friends who've got different lifestyles now. Actually, that's the other thing. You know, you can move house, you could retire early. You know, that's that sort of, we've got an opportunity. It's an opportunity, I think, hugely, to shape your life to fit what you like. And so it's that twisting that round, isn't it? From and that takes a little while before you get to that stage, but it's there.
One of the things you've spoken about quite a bit is about your friends and about that kind of more to life community. And how important do you think that is to people, to have others who are going through the same thing and others who understand?
Huge. I don't think well, you were there at Writing Book Launch. I wouldn't have written my book. I wouldn't be doing this without that group of friends. I know that now. You know, they know me like nobody else. I've got a safe space with them, and we've got a lovely group of, probably, I can't remember, a dozen or so, but some of us are closer than others, and I think that's just, you know, I think we're friends for life, actually. Absolutely.
That's a really lovely thing to hear, actually. I mean, Debbie, do you find that people do get a lot of solace from actually being with others who genuinely understand and going through that journey together?
Yeah, I do. I think support is vital, and, you know, looking at who's in your support network in terms of family and friends, sort of professional support, also the support within the relationship. Some, you know, if people are embarking on the treatment as a solo person, obviously looking at their support network. Support's key, isn't it? Hence why we're talking together tonight. And I think, you know, to draw into just the kind of mediums of which we can get support as well, in terms of online. You know, obviously the groups, some groups are reconvening in a face-to-face way, but absolutely support is important.
Oh, and we all think we're alone, don't we? Whatever we're going through, we think we're alone, and knowing that is that's not the case is so valuable.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And, you know, I would urge everyone to use our groups and to talk to one another, because it's certainly true. It can really make all the difference. Lesley, one of the things I know that a lot of people will be wanting to know is, you know, you've talked a lot about how you closed in and you were very unhappy for a while. But how long does it take? You talk about working through this. How long does that process take? Because people want to know, if I've got to go through this process, when is there going to be a chink of light at the other end of the tunnel?
How long's a piece of string, I think, isn't it? And I mean, it's nearly 20 years since we stopped treatment, but I spent 15 of those years trying to bury my head in the sand. So, I mean, I did some other development work, but the last 4 or 5 years, that's when my healing really started, and I've really worked through it. So I think I don't think you could say, but it's not 20 years. It doesn't have to be 20 years.
I have to say, I started seeing a change in you a long time before 20 years ago. And it, you know, you may yourself feel that you've changed more recently, but certainly from an outside perspective, you became a much happier person, I have to say. I mean, do you think, Debbie, that there is a kind of length of time that or is it a very personal thing?
Yeah, I think it's very personal. I think it's a very sort of, it can be a very slow progress as well. I think it involves not just people, but activities. Again, sort of looking back over Lesley's book, you know, it might start with counselling, but what I'm also aware of is that people may go to the acupuncturist, people may access Reiki, people may, you know, just take up something that's a new hobby, be creative, journal. There's so many access to support. But I think in all of that, it's about sort of getting in touch with oneself, really, because you will be changed, regardless about whatever happens in terms of treatment. Potentially, you're not the same person or people that embark upon the treatment when they first go through the clinic door as to those people that leave at the end. And often we need to be reminded that, I don't know, that the kind of different aspects of change and transformation again are invisible, aren't they? But absolutely, there can be that life on the other side, whatever the other side looks like, but we don't have that sense of how long that will be, and it's very gradual, and it might be just one day, you know, we look back, or even one morning we can look back and think, oh, that hasn't felt quite so painful that time.
And I think it's also it can be an opportunity, I would say. I remember when I interviewed Pamela Sigdinos, who's the first childless blogger, and one thing she said was that if you've got children, your life's kind of mapped out in a fairly rigid sort of way, whereas without we've got, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity we didn't want, but to map out that life, and if you like, to go through the empty nest type thing a bit younger, and to shape our life and ourselves into, you know, to ways that that fit us. So yeah, don't forget that. I think that's key. That's important.
Finally, I just think we've got time probably for a last sort of question for both of you around. You've covered this a bit, but particularly Lesley, are there any things that you would really recommend if you had your kind of top tips for someone? You've talked a bit about doing yoga and things. I mean, do you think that some of those other things are actually really beneficial? And what would you say were the things that really helped get you through it?
Well, for me, I think some sort of body work is really helpful. I mean, Debbie will know about The Body Keeps the Score, the book that we hold trauma in our body. So some sort of body work is really helpful, whether it's yoga, whether it's running, dancing, something that I think writing is helpful. There's sort of proof, if you like, that journaling and again helps. And it's like for me, it's also like having that therapist on hand when she wasn't there. And the other thing that's really helped me is creativity. I've rediscovered lots of things that I used to do as a child, and I thought, if you like, stitched myself back together quite a few, held myself together, certainly this last couple of years. But I think the other thing is knowing that just because somebody else did that doesn't mean to say it would work for you. So I think that's, as a Joseph Campbell, if you can see your path ahead of you, it's not your path you make with every step. So I would say try different things. Some will work, some won't, but you'll find there is a path for you, but you need to play to find it.
That's a lovely idea, actually, about your own path. And I think it's probably a really important point, because I think everyone's often looking for answers for someone else, but then you maybe need to find your own, don't you? I mean, Debbie, would you have anything to add to that?
No, absolutely that. And again, you know, making reference to somebody that you've brought in your book, as in Brené Brown, who talks about vulnerability, and that's the absolute birthplace of creativity and discovery of. The thing is, vulnerability, often comes in a place of where we've experienced pain and suffering as well. So we need to be mindful that these two things, you know, that duality of things can actually happen sort of side by side, but we have to go through a process at our own pace, at our own time, discovering what it is we need for ourselves, that to be able to go into our backpack, our toolbox, whatever it is to nourish us and to support us and sustain us through whatever it is we're going to have to endure, because we're always living with that uncertainty, aren't we? And that sort of trying to predict. But so I think it is that, you know, vulnerability can actually give rise to creativity, which can help with our healing.
Thanks.
You saw Brené Brown's books on my bookshelf there, didn't you?
Oh, right. Okay.
Lesley, are there any things that you'd particularly recommend that people read other than your book or look at?
Not particularly. I think, you know, we're in World Childless Week while we're doing that. I would say that, you know, that there's going to be lots of there's some blogs about legacy today. People will share their stories on I think a few days ago, and on Sunday it's about moving forward. So not specifically, but look for role models. Look, you know, see what resonates. Read people's stories, and it's that belief that you get into that head that you can have that life on the other side. So I think do what it takes to get that, I would say.
Thank you, Lesley, and thank you for being such a brilliant role model for the fact that you can find joy beyond childlessness. And thank you, Debbie, for all of your useful thoughts from a counselling perspective as well, which I think have been really, really helpful. And thank you everyone for joining us this evening. It's been really, really lovely to have you all with us and to have your questions and thoughts as well, which have been really helpful. Don't forget, if you want to go back to anything from this evening or tell friends about this webinar, there'll be a link to it on our webinars page in the next week or so once the recording's ready. Also, please don't forget that we're your charity and we're here for you. Our support line's open every weekday from 10 to 4. There's a More to Life group for those who are living without children and a Moving On from Treatment group for those who are making decisions about what to do next. So please do use our services. They're all free from charge whenever you need help or support. Thanks a lot and take care, everyone. Thanks, Lesley. Thanks, Debbie. And good night to you all. Have a happy evening. Bye.